Set the stage. Imagine being stranded on a desolate island at the edge of the world, starving, freezing, betrayed, and worse, surrounded by people you no longer trust. This isn't fiction. This is The Wager, a true story from the 18th century that exposes the brutal reality behind naval glory, survival, and human nature. Part 1, The Imperial Mission. 1740, Britain's dangerous gamble. In the year 1740, the world is gripped by imperial conflict. The British Empire and the Spanish Empire are at war not just with cannons and ships, but with dreams of gold and domination. This is the War of Jenkins' Ear, named after a gruesome incident where a British captain's ear was cut off by Spanish forces, sparking outrage and eventually war. In the shadows of empire, the British Navy launches a secretive mission. A fleet of ships under Commodore George Anson is ordered to sail around the world, attack Spanish ports, and most importantly, capture the Spanish treasure galleons returning from the New World. Among this squadron is a ship named The Wager, commanded by Captain David Cheap, with about 250 men on board. But make no mistake, this isn't a crew of heroes. Many of the men were press-ganged, essentially kidnapped off the streets of Britain and forced into naval service. Others were hardened criminals, desperate sailors, and young boys with no clue of what lay ahead. The officers? Many were from the upper class, driven by duty or ambition, with little regard for the suffering of the common sailors. Conditions on board? Horrific. Food was scarce and rotting. Disease, especially scurvy, due to lack of vitamin C, spread rapidly. Discipline was enforced by the lash, flogging, chaining, and sometimes even execution. And yet, despite all this, they sailed on, chasing the illusion of glory and Spanish gold. But nature had other plans. To reach their target, the fleet had to pass through one of the most dangerous maritime zones in the world, Cape Horn, the southernmost tip of South America, known to sailors as the graveyard of ships. Storms here aren't just bad, they're legendary. 100-foot waves. Freezing winds. Endless fog and rain. Crews were often lost without a trace, simply swallowed by the sea. And that's exactly where The Wager's real story begins. During this brutal passage, the fleet is scattered by storms. The Wager becomes separated, tossed mercilessly by waves and ice, with sick, starving men below deck and officers struggling to stay in control. Eventually, barely holding together, The Wager drifts toward the unknown coast of Patagonia, at the very edge of the world, where disaster is about to strike. Curious question for the next part. What happens when the Empire's promises vanish, the shipwreck begins, and the only law left is survival? Will Captain Cheap hold command, or will chaos take the helm? Part 2, Disaster Strikes. Shipwreck at the end of the world. After surviving months of disease, hunger, and stormy seas, The Wager finally reaches the storm-racked waters off the coast of southern Chile, but the men are broken, and the ship is barely holding together. By now, more than 100 sailors are already dead, many from scurvy, others from exposure or injuries. Those still alive are weakened skeletons, unable to walk without collapsing. The officers, including Captain David Cheap, are desperately clinging to order, but the chain of command is fraying fast. Then, in the dead of night, fate delivers the final blow. May 1741, The Wager crashes violently onto the rocks near Wager Island, part of the desolate and uncharted coast of Patagonia. The ship is wrecked. Mast shattered. Hull torn apart. Supplies lost to the sea. The crew, exhausted, wet, and half-dead, scrambles onto land with nothing but the clothes on their backs. They are marooned on a barren, icy island with no rescue in sight. No map. No food. No contact with the outside world. The island itself is a nightmare. Freezing rain lashes constantly. No edible plants or reliable game. Firewood is scarce, and shelter is nearly impossible to build. Men start dying from starvation, cold, and hopelessness. Discipline collapses, some men turn feral, stealing, hoarding, or threatening others. Captain Cheap, clinging to his authority, becomes increasingly harsh and erratic. He shoots a crew member in a heated dispute. He enforces brutal punishments, even as men are freezing to death. His authority becomes more feared than respected. Meanwhile, John Bulkeley, the ship's gunner, quietly rises as a rival leader. A skilled carpenter and realist, Bulkeley represents survival over rank. He believes Captain Cheap is no longer fit to lead. With growing support, Bulkeley begins to challenge Cheap's decisions and authority. The camp is now split into factions. One clinging to the Navy's rigid discipline. The other embracing mutiny not out of rebellion, but for survival. And here's the chilling truth. They all know if they don't get off the island soon, they're going to die. So Bulkeley proposes a daring, almost impossible plan. Build a new boat from the Wager's wreckage. Sail north more than 2,500 miles through treacherous waters, storms, and unknown enemy territory, all the way to Portuguese-controlled Brazil. Leave Captain Cheap behind if he tries to stop them. What follows next is a moral dilemma for every man. Obey the chain of command, or break it to survive? Curious question for the next part. Is defying a captain in the middle of nowhere an act of mutiny or an act of salvation? And what happens when the survivors finally return and tell the world their version of the truth? Part 3, Survival in Mutiny. When survival defies authority. Wager Island is no longer just a site of shipwreck, it has become a battlefield of willpower, desperation, and mutiny. As days turn into weeks, the crew faces an unbearable truth. No help is coming. The island is unforgiving. Men live off shellfish, seaweed, and sometimes raw birds. The cold numbs their limbs and their minds. Despair leads some to violence, madness, even suicide. In this growing nightmare, leadership becomes a question of survival, not rank. Cheap versus Bulkeley, the battle for command. Captain David Cheap, once a symbol of royal authority, is now a man unraveling. He becomes violent and paranoid. He executes a sailor for trying to escape. His own officers begin to whisper, is he fit to lead, or is he dragging us all to death? John Bulkeley, on the other hand, emerges as the people's leader. He's a gunner, technically far below Cheap in rank, but high in respect among the men. He organizes rations, scavenges wood, and hatches a desperate but brilliant plan. Build a small vessel using the remains of the Wager, and escape. He records everything, each death, each injustice, each broken law, in a secret journal, preserving his version of the truth for what's to come. The mutiny. Eventually, Bulkeley puts it plainly. Follow me, or die here under Cheap's madness. Out of over 80 survivors, nearly all side with Bulkeley. Captain Cheap is left with just a handful of loyalists, including midshipman John Byron, a young nobleman. Bulkeley's party sets sail, using makeshift boats, navigating through harsh winds, dangerous coastlines, unknown indigenous lands, risk of Spanish capture. They sail over 2,500 miles northward in open boats with no maps, only instinct, courage, and desperation. Every mile is a death sentence waiting to happen. One boat capsizes. Men die of starvation. Others are left behind or disappear into the wild. Yet somehow, some of them survive, eventually reaching the coast of Brazil, collapsing into the arms of Portuguese officials. They are safe. Alive. But what they carry back isn't just their bodies, it's a story. A story they will soon weaponize. Meanwhile, Captain Cheap, John Byron, and a few others are still trapped back on Wager Island, and their nightmare is far from over. They too will eventually try to escape, but how, and what they'll say later, will change everything. Curious question for the next part. When both mutineers and their captain return home with clashing stories, who will the British Empire believe? And more importantly, is truth enough to survive the court of power and reputation? Part 4, Return and Reckoning. The battle for truth begins. Brazil, 1742. Months after the escape from Wager Island, a group of half-dead, sunburned, and malnourished survivors stagger into a Portuguese outpost. These are the men led by John Bulkeley, the so-called mutineers. But in their minds, they're not traitors, they are heroes who beat death. And they're not just surviving, they're preparing to tell their side of the story. Narratives take shape. Bulkeley, always thinking ahead, had kept detailed journals. He documents every event, every death, every act of cruelty by Captain Cheap. By the time they return to England, he's ready. He publishes a book, A Voyage to the South Seas. It goes viral by 18th century standards. The British public is captivated by this tale of survival, leadership, and tyranny at sea. In his version, he's the rational, moral savior. Captain Cheap is a violent, incompetent despot. The mutiny? Not a betrayal, but a moral obligation to save lives. And here's the twist. The public believes him. But the captain returns. Months later, against all odds, Captain David Cheap, Midshipman John Byron, and a few others also returned to England. Their route was even more dangerous, captured by the Spanish, imprisoned, then eventually released and repatriated. They arrived to find the story already written. But Captain Cheap is not silent. He files official complaints. He insists that Bulkeley and the others were mutineers, that they abandoned royal authority, and committed treason. And so begins one of the most delicate and complex naval court-martials in British history. The court-martial, truth versus image. The British Admiralty now faces a dilemma. If they punish the mutineers, they risk making heroes look like villains. If they side with them, they undermine naval authority and hierarchy. And worse, the Empire's image is on the line. So what do? They conduct a strategic court-martial. Every word, every judgment is filtered through the lens of political safety and imperial branding. In the end, the verdict is ambiguous. No one is executed. No one is honored. It's as if the Empire says, let the truth stay buried if it threatens the crown. But the effects are long-lasting. Bulkeley fades into quiet obscurity. Cheap never commands again. John Byron, the young midshipman, survives not only the island and the sea, but the politics of the Empire, and one day becomes an admiral, and the grandfather of Lord Byron, the romantic poet who will turn pain into poetry. Curious question for the next part. Did the British Empire care more about survival or silence? And what deeper legacy did this forgotten shipwreck leave on literature, politics, and how we remember truth itself? Part 5, Legacy and Truth. The wreck that echoed beyond the sea. The story of the Wager began with a mission for glory, but it ended as something far more powerful. A story of what it truly means to survive, not just physically, but morally. A quiet ending, a loud legacy. After months lost to storms, hunger, betrayal, and battle, the survivors returned home. But not all of them found peace. John Bulkeley, the gunner-turned-leader, came back a survival hero, but was quietly set aside by the Royal Navy. His book sold well. His name? Faded. Captain Cheap returned too broken, haunted, and never trusted with a command again. Midshipman John Byron, just a young man during the disaster, would rise through the ranks to become an admiral. And eventually, the grandfather of the poet Lord Byron, whose verses of isolation, rebellion, and honor echo this very tale. What survived was not just a wreck, but a question. Who gets to tell the story? And when everyone is wounded, who do we call the villain? The Empire's silent decision. In the aftermath of the court-martial, the British Admiralty made a quiet but clear choice. Don't reward the mutineers. Don't punish them either. Bury the mess. Protect the image. Because the real threat wasn't a few desperate sailors. It was the idea that the Royal Navy could break. That its captains could be questioned. That in the face of death, sometimes the right thing isn't to obey, but to lead yourself. In an empire obsessed with honor, the Wager revealed something terrifying. Honor doesn't always survive reality. What this story teaches us today. The Wager is not just about a shipwreck. It's about human nature under extreme pressure, and it holds timeless lessons for all of us navigating storms in our own lives. 5 lessons you can use in life. 1. Leadership is trust, not title. A true leader isn't the loudest voice, it's the one who keeps people alive when everything's falling apart. 2. Sometimes, survival means breaking the rules. When the system fails, morality must take its place. Courage means questioning, not just complying. 3. Resilience is built in chaos. Growth doesn't come from comfort. It's the storm that forges your strength. 4. Control your own narrative. If you don't tell your story, someone else will, and they might get it wrong. Be the author of your truth. 5. Ask yourself who you become in crisis. What you choose in darkness defines your light. A final thought for you. You may never face a shipwreck at sea. But you will face moments when everything falls apart. Moments when no one's coming to save you. When the rules no longer serve you. When you must choose, do I survive? Or do I stay silent? The wager teaches us that even in the worst storms, we have a choice. Not just to live, but to live with meaning, courage, and truth.